So we left our last reading at kind of a pretty important part. The boy, who is now a mouse, had gotten into the kitchen, and there is a plan to put Mouse Maker in all of the witch's food somehow. That's what he's trying to figure out next. So here we go. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says this meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me her plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped around the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. Then he said, "Come on, boys, give her some gravy." He carried the plate round to everyone in the kitchen, and do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat onto the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. This is why you're always nice at restaurants. Quite soon another waiter came in and he shouted, "Everyone in the big RSPCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit farther around the garbage bin so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the large silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall. "Into that silver basin is where the soup is going," I told myself, "so that's where the stuff in my little bottle must go as well." I noticed that high up near the ceiling, above the side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. If I can somehow clamber up onto that shelf, I thought, then I've got it made. I shall be directly above the silver basin. But first, I must somehow get across to the other side of the kitchen, and then up to the middle shelf. A great idea came to me. Once again I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the garbage bin. Then, hanging upside down, sorry. Then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I had seen last Easter, and the way he had got the trapeze swinging higher and higher and higher, and had then let go and gone flying through the air. So just at the right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring clear across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, what marvelous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf I somehow managed to shimmy up a little water pipe in the corner, and in no time at all I was up on the very top shelf just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and the frying pans. I thought that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a superposition, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle. I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured what was in it straight into the silver basin below. The next moment one of the cooks came along with a giant saucepan of steaming green soup and poured the whole lot into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and shouted, "Soup for the big party, all ready to go out." Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I had done it. Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top of the shelf. It was much easier to move about without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one saucepan to the handle of another, all the way along that top shelf, while far below me cooks and waiters were all bustling about and the kettles were steaming and pans were spluttering and pots were boiling, and I thought to myself, "Oh boy, this is the life. What fun it is to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this." I kept right on swinging. I swung most marvelously from handle to handle, and I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot I was in full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look at that dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below me of a white-coated figure in a tall white hat. And then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whizzed through the air, and there was a shoot of pain in the end of my tail, and suddenly I was falling, and falling head first towards the floor. Even as I fell, I knew just what had happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash onto the floor and everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there were big black boots going stamp, 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 and I dodged around them and ran and ran and ran, twisting and turning and dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stamp on it!" The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots stamping away at me, and I dodged and swerved and twisted and turned, and then, in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up the trouser leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers, he's gone up my trousers. Hold on, boys, I'll get him this time." The man's hands began slapping at the trouser leg now, and I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go, and that was up. I dug my little claws into the hairy skin of the man's leg and scuttled upwards, higher and higher, past the calf, past the knee, and onto the thigh. "Holy smoke!" the man was yelling. "It's going all the way up. It's going right up my leg." I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slap, slap, slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks. And I kept climbing and I kept dodging, and soon I reached the very top of the trouser leg, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help! Help!" the man was screaming. "It's in my knickers! It's running around in my flaming knickers! Get it out! Someone help me get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly slob!" someone else shouted. "Pull down your pants and we'll soon catch him." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet and the zipper begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward and found the top of the other trouser leg. I went down it like greased lightning and came out the bottom of it, and once again I was on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers! Get it out! Will somebody please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding around him and laughing their heads off, and nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sack of potatoes. I burrowed down in among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because now they were shouting, "It's not in there. There's no mice in there, you silly twerp." "There was. I swear there was," the man was shouting back. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again the kitchen was all of a bustle, with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with the complaint about tough meat coming in again. "Hey, boys," he shouted. "I asked the old hag if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really tasty." I had to get out of that kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, waiting for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled it around to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it were missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and two more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leaped out of the sack of potatoes and went across the kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light. I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again, in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shinnied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all in their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you. They are at this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly she withdrew her hand. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "My darling, what happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered. "It hurts like a billy-o." "Let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "You poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That will stop the bleeding." She fished a small lace-edged handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. He'll be all right now, she said. Just try to forget about it. Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup? Every drop, I said. Do you think you could put me where I can watch them? Yes, she answered. My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out as long as you're careful not to be seen. Bruno's in there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's keeping him busy for a while. Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off her lap and transferred to the handbag. Hello, Bruno, I said. This is a great roll, he said, nibbling away in the bottom of the bag, but I wish there was butter on it. I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly, sitting at their two long tables in the center of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke over everything. All around us, summer holiday guests in the rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking sticks, but there were also plenty of families, with a husband, a wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent. "That's her, Grandmamma," I whispered. "That's the Grand High Witch." "I know," my grandmother whispered back. "She's the tiny one in black, sitting at the head of the nearest table." "She could kill you," I whispered. "She could kill anyone in this room with her white-hot sparks." "Look out," my grandmother whispered. "The waiter's coming." I popped down out of sight, and I heard William saying, "Your roast lamb, madam, and which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots?" "Carrots, please," my grandmother said, "but no potatoes." I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering, "It's all right. He's gone." I popped my head up again. "Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this," I whispered. "No," she answered. "I don't suppose they will. My problem is, I've got to talk to you without moving my lips." "You're doing beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 200? "It just seemed like 200, I said. "I was wrong, too," my grandmother said. "I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England." "How many are there?" I asked. 84, she said. "There were 85, I said, "but one of them got fried." At that moment I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. "Look out, Grandmamma," I whispered. "Here comes Bruno's father."